It had been 2 days since Suzuki Satoru met Kino Fazrasenvern. Suzuki Satoru had spent this time on exploring the divergences between his knowledge and abilities in this world, as well as verifying the abilities of the items he carried. After making ample preparations one morning, the two of them arrived at the vicinity of the royal castle. After taking shelter behind the walls of an abandoned house that looked to have once been an opulent home belonging to some noble or other, they poked their heads out from time to time to observe the situation inside the castle. The undead possessed dark vision. Therefore, when both the infiltrators and watchmen were undead, the night was the ally of neither side. However, certain undead like vampires, for instance, were weakened by sunlight, which would diminish their abilities. If the undead being occupying the castle that they were hunting was an overlord, then it would not be penalized by sunlight, but the same could not be set for its minions. With that in mind, they had chosen to launch their attack during the day. The castle had not changed from when they had scouted it out yesterday. While it might still be trapped, one could not do anything when one was afraid of everything. Are we really going to enter from the front? That's the 5th time you've asked that, Suzuki Satoru thought, and then he answered her. That's the first step. Well, we'll probably be spotted. However, what the opposition does at that point will be crucial. Well, we'll change up our own actions at that point to match our alerted opposition in the castle. It would be best to pinpoint the location of the enemy mastermind the first time around, and launch an ambush to eliminate him quickly. After all, the chances of failure grow the more time passes between the first scouting and wiping out the enemy leader. Kino knew Suzuki Satoru could use 10th tier spells, and apparently she had assumed that he would strike down his foe from the outside with some powerful spell. However, such a thing was impossible, especially if the enemy was on Suzuki Satoru's level. It would not fall to a single spell. After that, once the master of the castle knew there was an assassin coming for him, he would probably heighten his guard. In that case, it would be very hard for Suzuki Satoru, who lacked thief skills, to infiltrate by himself. Suzuki Satoru glanced at Kino. She was equipped with various items she had borrowed from Suzuki Satoru. The most eye-catching example was a gauntlet that had large gems set into the back of its hand. It was a superior piece of workmanship called the Gauntlet of Primary Colors. It was imbued with 3 spells. Body of Effulgent Barrel, which reduced bludgeoning damage, Body of Effulgent Heliator, which reduced slashing damage, and Body of Effulgent Aquamarine, which reduced piercing damage. Thus it could be said that it lessened all physical damage taken by the wearer. Normally speaking, these 3 spells would override each other when cast, and so they would not be able to coexist, but this gauntlet stood as an exception to that rule. In addition, each spell could completely negate one instance of the damage they resisted, and this item also retained that ability. However, this item was not as handy as it sounded. The item would break if any of the negation abilities were used. Still, if that was all, one might still consider gathering a large amount of them, and using them as disposable items. However, it also bore the extreme drawback of not being able to equip any other items to that item slot within 4 hours of it breaking. In addition, the activation of those abilities was not up to the wearer, rather, it would automatically activate if a certain amount of damage was taken. Frankly speaking, it would be considered a trash item by players of Suzuki Satoru's level, and so he had around 10 of them in his inventory. There were probably at least twice that amount in Nazarik's treasury. He sighed as he thought about Nazarik. If only he had the various items in there, he would have more options to choose from, and be able to adopt a more spell-heavy strategy. Pathetic. The great underground tomb of Nazarik had vanished when the game ended. All that remained was the legacy of the guild, the character Manga, the ring, and his staff. Now then, Suzuki said, and after regaining his spirits, he cast Summon Undead first to conjure an animal zombie, specifically a dog zombie. Zombies moved slowly, and the zombies of this city looked different from the zombies that Suzuki Satoru had created. While he could not do it in Yggdrasil, it was not impossible to disguise them with clothes. However, in the end he had still chosen a dog zombie for his speed. After that, he cast Undeath's Slave Sight. This way, Suzuki Satoru could see what the dog zombie could see. Wraiths were incorporeal and could pass through walls. They were thus suitable for infiltration, but he could not use Undeath's Slave Sight with them. Suzuki Satoru knew that it had been possible once, but it had been patched out at some point. Perhaps the patch might not have applied to this world, so he tested it out, but in the end it did not work after all. It would probably be best to consider that all of Suzuki Satoru's abilities were operating under the rules of the latest patches. In that case, what would happen if Kino used Undeath's Slave Sight? Well, the question had crossed his mind. He could not test it out because she could not cast spells of that tier. However, the magic of Yggdrasil and this world were quite similar, so perhaps she would be using the post-patch version of the spell as well. What on earth is with this world? He could not believe that this was just a game world, no matter how he tried. However, neither could he believe that Suzuki Satoru had met with some accident in the real world, and this was a dream he was seeing in the moment before his death. It might be better to say he had been transported to another world or reborn into it. Perhaps such an explanation might be closer to the truth. Well, I don't have the time to be thinking about questions like this now, do I? If my opponent is on the level of an overlord, then distraction might mean death for me. I need to utterly destroy him and leave him nowhere to run. Finally, he had given it a cash item to hold in its mouth. It was called the exchange puppet. Both the distance that Suzuki Satoru had come and the fact that Kino was here had been carefully calculated with this item in mind. If he could not use this item, then there would have been no need to bring Kino at all. With that, his preparations were complete. He gave a mental command of go, and the dog zombie walked forward. Personally, he would have preferred it to run, but he had checked and confirmed that the dog zombies within the city did not run. For that reason, having it run would be very suspicious, and so he had ordered it to walk instead. It leaped over a ruined portion of the castle wall and walked straight through the castle gate. Suzuki Satoru had thought that undead minions would have shown up. He felt slightly disappointed when there were none. According to Kino, the undead creature that had taken over the castle had not brought any minions with it when she had first seen it. However, a long time had passed since it had taken the castle, and so he should have gathered several minions to itself, most likely undead ones. Well, I guess I'm lucky that there aren't any, although I can't be sure that there really aren't any. Undead slave sight took effect through the vision of the dog zombie. Therefore, Suzuki Satoru's ability to see through invisibility effects would not work. Thus, it was possible that there might be invisible undead around. However, he would not be able to do anything if he kept cowering from everything. Suzuki Satoru had the dog zombie enter the castle. He had already learned from external observation that there were zombies wandering throughout the castle. Since they had been protected from the weather, those zombies were better dressed than others, allowing others to see that they were people working within the castle. These zombies did not show any hostility to the dog zombie, much like how they had treated Suzuki Satoru when he had first arrived in this world. In other words, they were not under the control of the mysterious undead being within this castle. Still, even if they had the same abilities as Suzuki Satoru, surely they would not employ their limited use abilities on a mere dog zombie. Zombies, then. No, only zombies. Yes. There are zombies inside the castle, everyone inside the castle who turned into a zombie. In other words, he could not consider them as defensive forces. As the dog zombie continued forward, Suzuki Satoru began to feel baffled. There should have been high-tier undead here, standing watch over the entrance and passages. But as he had expected, there were none. There's an upper limit to the level's worth of undead that one can control. That should still be the same even in this world, so it's possible that he might have placed powerful undead creatures by his side. Speaking of which, shouldn't he have at least positioned one such creature near the castle's entrance? He continued advancing the dog zombie through the castle. It carried on as though its surroundings were totally devoid of people, although there were zombies wandering all over the place. Suzuki Satoru gradually began to feel uneasy. Things should not have gone this smoothly. He began wondering if this was a trap. According to Punito Mo Sense King for Dummies, right now I should back off and assess the situation, right? However, that assumes the enemy is on the same level as me, and has PK experience. Is it possible that he might not have such experience, which is why his defenses are full of holes, and he seems to lack any sense of caution? The dog zombie continued past the zombies wandering inside the castle, as laid out in the infiltration plan. Its wobbly gait from just now was calculated to make the opposition think this was an ordinary dog zombie that it accidentally stumbled in. That said, I don't think it's going to be of any use. Still, most unintelligent undead, the controlled kind, who only know how to obey simple orders, probably won't notice or run off to tell their master. Yesterday, he had asked Kino, if you had to position sentries, where would you put them? And the dog zombie was following the path she believed to be safest. It ended at Kino's father's room, the biggest and most luxurious room in the castle. If there was an enemy leader, it would most likely be found there. Fortunately, the floor and ceiling had not collapsed from decay, and the dog zombie soon neared its destination. If the enemy had deployed a wide area delay teleportation effect, then all his plans would go up in smoke. Therefore, he had also factored in the maximum radius of such an effect. We're going into close contact after this. Use the crystal in an emergency. Understood, I'm counting on you, Satoru-sama. He memorized the scenery that the dog zombie had seen, and then had it back off. Suzuki Satoru could still switch places with it by using its cash item if he felt he was in danger, so he sincerely hoped that it could successfully escape. He then began to buff himself. He could not forget to cast see-through on himself. There was a limit to the powers of a dog zombie's vision. There might really have been an invisible undead being along the way, and there was no telling if it was trailing behind the dog zombie. Such caution was well warranted. And then there was the most important thing. Perfect Unknowable. There was no need to change out his equipment. He had already kitted himself out to face a necromancer before coming here. In the moment that Suzuki Satoru cast greater teleportation, he was taken to his memorized location.